the main sanction that still needs to be done is the sanction against the 8 oil refineries, 2 of them in China, 4 in India, and 2 in Turkey, if they buy any more Russian oil. If those sanctions were put in place, I think that the oil revenues going to Russia would be down 70 or 80%. And I think that that would be the point after a few months of that Vladimir Putin would have to make some major changes and potentially stop the war.
Sir William Browder is Vladimir Putin's #1 foreign enemy and CEO at the Hermitage Capital Management. Welcome to our program, Sir William.
Great to be here.
I would like to begin our discussion with the state of Russian economy, because Russian oil and gas revenues may fall in November by around 35% from the corresponding months in 2024 to $6.5 billion due to cheaper oil and stronger ruble. According to recent reporting by Reuters, this would be another blow to Russia, adding recent US sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil. How significant are recent US sanctions and their implication for Russia's wartime economy?
Well, I think that going after Lukoil and Rosneft is a very strong step. What it means is that some of the buyers of their oil are no longer comfortable buying their oil. There is the risk of secondary sanctions on those buyers. And so we've read stories about certain refineries not taking the Russian oil, that a number of tankers are stuck offshore in various locations. And I have to believe that this is a strong step in the right direction. In my opinion, however, the main sanction that still needs to be done is the sanction against the 8 oil refineries, 2 of them in China, 4 in India, and 2 in Turkey, if they buy any more Russian oil. If those sanctions were put in place, I think that the oil revenues going to Russia would be down 70 or 80%. And I think that that would be the point after a few months of that Vladimir Putin would have to make some major changes and potentially stop the war.
Let's cover also the fate of this biggest Russia's oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, because they have to sell their foreign assets. Do they have any kind of chance to survive such heavy sanctions from US?
Well, I think that they do and they will, unless these sanctions are applied towards the buyers of their oil. If the US and the EU were to say anybody who buys oil from them would be subject to sanctions, then these companies would be out of business and Putin would be out of business.
It is also interesting, right now Russia tries also to continue sale of Russian oil because and Russia have to give buyers a large discounted oil. Would it be beneficial for India, China and Turkey instead to buy this discounted oil from Russia, trying to avoid the implications of Western sanctions, but despite the sanctions, just to buy cheaper Russian oil?
Well, of course, I'm sure that they would be very happy to buy cheap Russian oil, unless buying cheap Russian oil leads to other problems. And that's why secondary sanctions are so important. If it's just discounted Russian oil, that's a huge benefit for these companies. However, if it's discounted Russian oil, which leads to all sorts of other terrible problems, then they might not do it. And then all of a sudden, Russia's sitting out there with tankers filled up with oil that nobody wants to buy.
Let's also cover the position of Scott Bessent, U.S. Secretary of Treasury. He recently said that there could be another options for sanctions. Wall Street Journal reported that President Trump used not the toughest one, but the strong one option to sanction Russia. My first question would be, do you feel that these sanctions have been the toughest one imposed against Russia? And second question would be, do you feel that President Trump still has a lot of sanctions tool against Russia, because US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been saying that US runs out of options of sanctioning Russia.
So the sanctions are not the toughest that could be done. There are tougher sanctions. There's a piece of legislation currently sitting in the Senate, in the US Senate, which would impose 500% penalties on companies and countries that buy Russian oil. This famous piece of legislation sponsored by Lindsey Graham, which would be absolutely devastating if it were put in place. Interestingly, last week, before all this 28-point peace plan discussion, President Trump told Lindsey Graham that he was ready to allow this piece of legislation to go through the Senate. Now, in theory, the Senate doesn't need the president's approval, but given this Senate, they do, based on their behavior. But in any event, Trump gave Lindsey Graham the green light to push this forward. And in my opinion, the reason why all this craziness of the 28-point peace plan has come out is in response to the absolute fear by Putin that the Lindsey Graham bill would get passed and would basically destroy the Russian economy.
You just mentioned about this so-called famous 28-point plan. There have been some progress. Negotiations were held in Switzerland, in Abu Dhabi. What is your assessment of this new effort of President Trump to end the war in Ukraine? How close we are to ending this war? And we also would cover the interesting role of Steve Witkoff, as there were some new developments reported by Bloomberg.
Well, so the original 28-point peace plan that was presented was written in Russia. It was written in the Kremlin. It had only Kremlin talking points. That was strangely and very annoyingly taken on board by Steve Witkoff. Donald Trump never read it, never read the peace plan. And an ultimatum was put on Ukraine to agree or not agree this completely unacceptable proposal coming from the Kremlin by Thursday of this week. Now, thankfully, there were a lot of people inside the United States, inside the U.S. government and inside the U.S. Congress who reacted extremely negatively to this the original 28-point peace plan. And they were able to open up the conversation, change the plan to one that's, in my opinion, still not reasonable, but a lot less unreasonable than the original plan. And now we're in a situation where it's certain that the Russians won't accept it. And so I think you can have many peace plans floating around out there, but at the end of the day, the real crux of the matter is that Vladimir Putin wants to be at war. The only thing that he would prefer to being at war would be a complete collapse of Ukraine. And of course, the Ukrainians don't want to be at war, but Ukrainians don't want to surrender to Russia. And so, sadly, in my opinion, the war will continue.
Let's also cover the role of Steve Witkoff. According to the leaked conversation between Witkoff and Putin's advisor Yuri Ushakov, reported by Bloomberg, Steve Witkoff advised Yuri Ushakov how best to deal with President Trump, how to appease President Trump, and how to put forward this plan to the White House, how to make this look like as U.S. proposal, not as a Russian one. What is your reaction to this breaking news, this information about so friendly and appeasement talks between Ushakov, between Steve Witkoff and Kirill Dmitriev?
Well, I'm old enough to remember a time in American life where colluding with a evil enemy would be considered a very high crime. And so I can only take a very dim view of the conduct of this advisor to Trump, and it certainly will be one of the footnotes in history of really shameful conduct towards Ukraine.
You have been doing business for a while. From a doing business standpoint, how do you read this conversation? Do they have this attitude just to do this deal as business model, or does like Steve Witkoff just want to have this friendly, to use his friendship with Ushakov to make this deal done? And why does Steve Witkoff like Vladimir Putin? Interesting questions.
Well, I think that these are very interesting questions. Who knows what his motivations are? But what I can say is that they're inconsistent with the national interests of the United States. They're inconsistent with the American public. I read a survey very recently that 83% of the American public disagreed with the 28-point peace plan, that didn't like it, and so I don't know exactly what motivates Steve Witkoff, but surely it's not acting in the national interest of the United States.
Let's also cover recent developments regarding this peace plan. According to recent reporting by CNN, there are some significant issues which are still remain unresolved. The issue of territory, security guarantees, and also size of the Ukrainian army. What is your assessment of the proposed terms in this deal, the edited one and the initial proposal?
Well, I think the initial proposal was an indecent proposal, and I think the new revised version is one that allows Ukraine not to reject the initial proposal, but to look constructive while leaving out the most sensitive points, which are obviously the most important points, which are territory, the size of the military, and various other things like that, and of course security guarantees. And so I think that this was well played by Zelensky, given the horrific circumstances that he was put under, and in his mind, he needs to keep America on side. He doesn't want to openly reject what is an indecent proposal, but at the same time, he certainly can't accept it. And so this was a very well-played diplomatic victory for Zelensky, at least in the short term.
Do you feel that a momentum is with Ukraine right now in this diplomatic battle inside the White House?
Well, we don't know what's going on inside the White House, but what I can say, in my own experience, is that when the Russians do stuff, they usually do it with a sledgehammer. They don't do things subtly. And oftentimes, by doing things with such extreme, in this case, I would even call it diplomatic violence, it elicits a reaction. And the reaction has been very strongly sympathetic to Ukraine. The reaction from American politicians, the reaction from American public, the reaction from Europe, the reaction from everybody who doesn't sympathize with Putin. And that strong reaction is actually very helpful to Ukraine. And so Russia might have actually done itself a disservice by cooking up this indecent proposal in the 28-point plan by energizing people, by getting Europeans that might have been happy to try to sit in the back seat and wait for stuff to happen to understand that they need to wake up and do something right away.
It's also interesting, according to recent reporting by Wall Street Journal, after that phone conversation, so Steve Witkoff would advise Ushakov and Putin to call President Trump, congratulate him with his success regarding Gaza, and also promise him another round of negotiations. But Witkoff advised that to do this call, to call Trump just before this meeting in the White House between President Zelensky and Trump. Zelensky hoped to get Tomahawk missiles. However, this phone conversation between Trump and President Putin, this phone conversation was the reason why Trump did not provide Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles. Do you feel that Witkoff played into Russia's hand? He helped Russian sided with Russians just to prevent Ukraine from receiving Tomahawks?
Well, it looks like he played a very central role in this whole situation, and of course, the truth will all come out eventually. But on the surface, the facts are not very helpful to his cause.
Let's also cover another interesting matter of Russia's frozen assets. This matter was included in several proposals in this peace plans, how to use Russian assets. What is your position on that, and do you feel that this would be included in final draft or agreement, right?
Well, first of all, I don't think there's going to be any final draft agreements. There's a lot of proposals out there. Secondly, I think that part of the reason why this whole drama has emerged at this moment is because Europe is getting very close to confiscating the Russian frozen assets. And by creating all this supposed negotiation, it puts the decision to confiscate those assets on hold, in the same way as it puts the decision to sanction Chinese, Indian, and Turkish oil refineries on hold. And so if you look at what's going to happen as a result of all this, there won't be an agreement. Ukraine can't agree to Russia's terrible proposal, and Russia won't agree to the proposal that was hashed out between Ukraine and the United States. So the war will carry on, but what won't happen will be two things. One is that those oil sanctions will be delayed, and two is that the confiscation of the 300 billion, of frozen assets will be delayed. And so Putin has scored another tactical victory in his diplomatic war.
But don't you think that in the long-term perspective, Vladimir Putin risks, angering President Trump, because President Trump has invested so much efforts in this, his personal time, his personal reputation, his personal effort just to try to end this war against Ukraine. And even after the most recent efforts, he did not achieve his objectives. He couldn't get a Nobel Peace Prize. Wouldn't this just make President Trump more angry at Vladimir Putin and force him to impose another crippling sanctions against Putin's wartime economy? I mean, secondary tariffs.
Well, that would be the logical, emotional reaction. But we're now, since February, 9 months into this, and for whatever reason, Trump has not decided to take a tough stand towards Vladimir Putin. Why has he chosen to be so lenient? We don't know, but he has, and there's no reason to think that it's going to change anytime in the near future.
And my final point would be about this frozen Russian money. In Europe, there are some obstacles and countries who do not support using Russia's frozen assets. There are some legal and political concerns. How close we are to this major decision on Russia's frozen assets? Because, for example, Belgium does not support that along with other European nations.
I'm not worried about Belgium or Slovakia or Hungary blocking the whole thing. I am worried, though, about Donald Trump blocking it. And I think that this supposed peace negotiation that's going on gets in the way of confiscating those assets, because Trump will say, you're messing up my peace negotiations. And so as a result, we're stuck in this limbo where the assets can't be confiscated because of these unproductive and indecent proposals from Russia.
And can Donald Trump conduct these negotiations with Russians indefinitely?
Well, I don't think anything can happen indefinitely, but I think that we're nowhere near the point where Donald Trump is going to take a hard line on Putin because he's shown himself to have some kind of strange affection for the dictator.
And my last question would be about Vladimir Putin. Do you feel that he is getting ready to end this war anytime soon? Any kind of preparing way out plan from this terrible war?
I don't think so. I think that Vladimir Putin needs a war in order to stay in power. He needs a foreign enemy to distract the Russian people from his own failings. And I think this war will carry on, sadly, until Russia is defeated. And that's the only way to stop the war, is to defeat Russia.
Thank you, Sir William, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you.